I am absolutely delighted to be hosting a former colleague, a friend, and somebody for whom I have incredible admiration and respect, and in particular for her courage. Agnès Callamard, who is the Secretary General of Amnesty International. Agnès and I were colleagues at Columbia University, where I think you were there from 2013, 2021.
Yeah.
And you were recruited at the time from Article 19 in London to come and set up the Global Freedom of Expression initiative. We'll maybe come back and talk to that at some point. But you actually now at Amnesty, you've been there for 4 years, my goodness. You went back to Amnesty because you had been there before as chef de cabinet, right? From 1998 to 2001. And you left in 2001 to establish the Humanitarian Accountability Project, which has had a couple of name changes since then, but was the first international self-regulatory body for humanitarian agencies. At Amnesty, you have more than 10 million supporters, more than 70 offices worldwide, and you oversee global advocacy, investigations, and accountability efforts. You've led human rights investigations in more than 30 countries, and you have published extensively on human rights, women's rights, freedom of expression, refugee movements, investigative methodologies. If you have time, I'd like to also talk about the very important role that you played as UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial summary or arbitrary killings between 2016 and 2021, which included the investigation of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist, and also of Qasem Soleimani. So hopefully we will have time to do that. But let me start again by very warmly welcoming you, Agnès. It's a real privilege to have you here and a real treat to be united with you.
So. Thank you so much, Safwan, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and in that setting, beautiful setting, and looking forward to engaging with you and everyone else.
Thank you. Thank you. And I reached out to Agnès in December, shortly after the publication of the 296-page report on Gaza, on genocide, a report that was titled, "You Feel Like You Are Subhuman," a report that clearly determined the case of genocide. And I said it would be great for you to come and talk to us about the report. So we'd spend some time on that. But before we discuss the genocide report, not mine, I'd like us to go back 3 years back to February 2022, when Amnesty released a 280-page report concluding that Israel was committing apartheid against Palestinians.
Yeah.
Now, the findings of that report are very clear, that there is systematic oppression, territorial fragmentation, demographic engineering, and institutionalized discrimination. The report detailed the cruel system of domination and the crime against humanity, and labeled Israel's rule a crime against humanity. Now, it was not the first report by a human rights organization to determine that there was a system of apartheid conducted by Israel, but it was groundbreaking in that, unlike the Human Rights Watch report, which came out in 2021, and also B'Tselem report, which also came out in 2021, Human Rights Watch determined that there was apartheid within the Palestinian occupied territories. B'Tselem extended that to 1948 Palestine within Israel. But your report transcended Palestine to refugees and the denial of the right to return. And in that case, in that sense, it was really groundbreaking. So let's talk about that report for a little bit, if you don't mind. What made it different for Amnesty? In other words, why was Amnesty able to take it farther than B'Tselem and Human Rights Watch? And I know how difficult it was. I mean, Hagai Laad of B'Tselem came under death threats after the publication of their report. Omar Shakir at Human Rights Watch worked at this very, very extensively, and it took him a lot of effort over a year to get Ken Roth, who was the president of HRW at the time, to basically agree to it. And so those were very difficult processes. Yours must have been even more so.
Wow, it's a difficult question. The first point I want to make is that we do not oppose what our colleagues have done. We certainly do not denounce them or do not criticize them. They have approached apartheid in a different way. They've done a great work. I've had many conversations in Israel OPT when I went to launch the apartheid report with absolutely committed anti-apartheid activists, including with Israel proper. So these were both principled and tactical issues and decisions that I think were at play in how people were making their determination. Amnesty International points of departure is that the system of apartheid, Israel's system of apartheid, is driven by the artificial yet extremely powerful division of the Palestinian population. It's divided by territories, it's divided by status, it's divided by many things. And therefore, for Amnesty, it was really important not to undermine that understanding of what was happening by pretending that apartheid only applied to the occupied territories. And the additional empirical justification was the legal and political status on Palestinians in Israel 1947. And we spent a lot of time when we were researching and producing the report, we spent a lot of time building the argumentation as to why both the refugees and the Palestinian Israeli citizens were also the victims of an apartheid regime. In addition to the principle that was at play, which is dividing in order to maintain a superiority, racial superiority, there were also clear empirical legal basis for us to conclude that apartheid was enacted in those other spaces, including laws that have been adopted which made distinction between Palestinian citizen and Jewish citizen, and the clear hierarchy that has become even more pronounced over the last 2 years when with the right-wing governments becoming much more powerful.
Right. And the 2018 nation-state law codified into law that system of apartheid against Palestinian citizens of Israel.
That's it.
But it was also groundbreaking in that you really went beyond the borders, and it's a system of apartheid when you don't allow the refugees the right of return.
Yeah. I mean, that's what the apartheid regime of Israel is predicated on the establishment of spaces which are all run by their own legal system. So refugees, it's the refugee convention applied to Palestinian only. Gaza, West Bank, Israel 1947. I mean, all of these have their own legal fragmentation of what it means to be Palestinian. And it is how apartheid is being implemented through the fragmentation of what should be an historical and cultural or political wall. Now, it doesn't mean that the Palestinians, are all one and the same at all. There is division, there are a lot of different things. But the multiplication of those legal spaces for each of those populations is an essential element of the way the apartheid regime of Israel is being enacted.
Right. What impact did the report have? I mean, that report and the other reports, and I appreciate what you said about how, in many respects, the work of different organizations is not only respected by the other organizations, but it also helps build stronger cases and so on. You issued that report, other reports were issued. And have a genocide.
Yeah. I think the main impact is that right now in 2024, the word apartheid in relation to Israel is uttered a lot, many times. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you would not have heard it. Now, I'm not saying that this is because of us. I think it's because of a combination of forces and actors and reports, including the Amnesty report. And the reason why I think the Amnesty report was particularly attacked by the Israeli authorities up to now is because of who we are as an organization. We are an international organization with 72 national chapters. And when we launch a report of that historical nature, every national section is going to advocate around it, is going to go to the media, is going to do what I'm doing now, is going to speak to our members. It's owned by each one of those 72 national entities. And it means that our capacity to move into the public discourse and into people's consciousness is much, much serious than anyone else. And I suspect that is why we are often so attacked by the authorities, and national entities are too. So, when you are, right now, when you are German and that you go to the media and you speak about the genocide, you can actually be cancelled out, imprisoned, attacked. But our sections do that. Our sections go to, they feel empowered by the work that has been done. They trust the content, and they are prepared to go and advocate. And that's what 72 of those, or most of them, will do, from Senegal to South Africa, from Germany to Austria, which is another very difficult country. And they do. In December, my Austrian and German colleagues were in the media day in, day out, putting out the genocide message. Nobody else was able to do that. I'd been able to do that before. That's our strength.
So in the process, a couple of questions come to my mind, and then I really would love to talk more about the report, the genocide report. They are vulnerable, aren't they, in some of those places? They get attacked. They get more than cancelled. That's one. And then another question with this based to my is, what's this? do you get resistance from within the organization, and how do you deal with that?
So let me begin with that question. Amnesty International is very large and very old. We're born in the early 1960s, mostly out of Europe initially, and progressively became an international organization. We have 72 national chapters in Europe, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, including in North Africa. And we had one in Israel. So the chapter in Israel has now been suspended because of the tension that you are speaking about.
When was it suspended?
It was suspended at the beginning of January.
Right, because I met Badawi. What's her first name? She runs it out of Nazareth, I think. Yeah. Okay.
So there are tensions. Of course, for instance, when we published the apartheid report, there were tensions, not only with our section in Israel, but also in other parts of the world, including in the United States. There are tensions over many reports, not just those in relation to Israel, but in particular in relation to Israel. There is a polarization that plays out. We are learning. What it means is that when we worked on the genocide report, my colleagues in particular who were leading the preparation for this report spent, I will say, at least 3 months working with every one of those 72 national entities, reaching out, trying to understand what could be their problem, security issue, legal issue. So the preparation that goes behind those reports internally is extensive. It's as much as what we are doing almost in terms of producing the data and the evidence. And I want to insist on that because in an era where there is so much division, polarization, misinformation and disinformation, we are able to work through that by speaking, by dialoguing, by reaching out, by creating training sessions, by translating everything. I was mentioning the fact to your student when we produced a 300-page report on genocide. There were a 30-page report, a 30-page question and answer that was produced for every one of our national entities so that they will know how to answer difficult questions. And then we train them before we launch the report. I think it's important to understand that if we want to change heart and mind, it takes a lot of effort. In addition to producing those, I think the genocide report for me is one of a kind for Amnesty. My colleagues worked days in and days out. It's a product of love. It's a product of fears and of tears and of anger. It's a product of fear because we had colleagues in Gaza collecting the data for the last 14 months. And my fear was that every day I feared I was going to get a phone call that they had been killed. That was a little fear compared to their fear, but still. So lots of work went into this report in terms of the collection of evidence and then the legal analysis, which needed to be absolutely bulletproof, but also cutting edge, because there is very little jurisprudence on genocide as applied to a state. There is jurisprudence for individual criminal responsibility for genocide, but for us to found a state responsible for genocide is barely anything. Right. So Amnesty International not only collected the extensive evidence that we did, but we spent a lot of time working with each other, reaching out to legal scholars, judges, and so on, trying to build that understanding of how do we prove state genocide? How do we prove that a state intended to commit genocide as opposed to one individual? So lots of work, legally speaking, for months. And, as I was saying, and lots of work internally to bring people to a common understanding, because we are never as strong as when we are united. And for us to have 72 national entities going to the media on December 6th saying Israel is committing a genocide against the Palestinians of Gaza, that is a victory. We had 71 instead of 72, but hey, that was a very good start. Yeah.
That is amazing. That really is amazing that you're able to bring them all
Everybody.
on board.
Everybody except
one. Agnès, talk to us a little bit, understanding that very few in the room, but there are a few who are legally trained. But explain to us sort of the determination legally that got you to the conclusion that this was genocide, and what do you think are the implications? And you call in your report, there are calls to action, including to the ICC, right? But what does this mean for the ICJ? What does this mean for the ability to actually hold Israel accountable on the crime of genocide?
So the two steps that we followed to prove genocide, the first one was to prove that Israel was committing some of the acts prohibited by the Geneva, the Genocide Convention, which are, in our case, we found that it was killings causing serious bodily or mental harm, and probably the most important one, deliberately inflicting on Palestinians in Gaza conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical destruction. That last one is the one that took the greatest amount of work. We had, over the last 12 months or 8 months when we started doing that work, already proven killings, the deliberate killings of civilians, the indiscriminate attacks on civilians, and the disproportionate attacks on civilians. So we had quite an extensive body of evidence already, along with the bodily and mental harm. The third one, which is to look at the conditions of life, that's what needed to be really investigated over the last 3 or 4 months, and it has meant looking at access to water, access to food, the destruction of farming land, the destruction of infrastructures that are essential for the survival of a population, the destruction of the hospitals, the inability to access any kind of humanitarian assistance. All of those issues were investigated from the standpoint of, could there be another explanation as to why they have been destroyed, or as to why they have been prevented? And of course, Israel is always arguing that, they targeted this because Hamas were there. That's the hospital story. So we looked at several of those indicators and really, tried to see whether in each of those scenarios, each of those incidents, there could be another explanation beside the determination to exterminate.
Right.
And we concluded, of course, there were a few incidents where indeed there was a military objective, but everything that we put in the report demonstrate very clearly that no other explanation can be reasonably advanced to explain the multiplication of attacks at night when using very large weapons in an urban setting, knowing that those weapons will have the largest impact, most destructive impact on civilians, and doing that not just once, not just twice, not just 3 times, but dozens and dozens of times. We understood that the authorities needed to learn. They could not get it right immediately. We could give them the benefit of the doubt. But when, after several repeated warnings from humanitarian actors, they continued to target those buildings, there was no other reason, no other explanation, reasonable explanation that we could get if there was no military target that we could identify. The destruction of farming lands, the destruction of the water infrastructures. We have documented many examples of authorities destroying civilian infrastructures after they had taken control over them. So that means after their the military objective had been achieved. So the only objective left was to ensure that no one could ever come back there. So that was, that took a lot of time and effort. And as I have said, we looked at alternative hypotheses for everything that we did. And then we looked at intention, because that's what makes the crime of genocide so specific. You need to prove genocidal intent.
By act, not only by words.
By both, by act and by words. So we looked at the words, and we analyzed some 100 statements from public authorities, so how they had been interpreted, how they had circulated, and how they had been used by Israeli soldiers on the ground. And so the virtuous circle here of those calls for genocidal act. But we looked also at the acts themselves. And what did those acts tell us? And that's what I was just explaining, that those acts could only tell one story, which was a story of annihilation. 47,000 people killed. That's the latest number I heard today from the Gaza Ministry of Health. Some 13,000 kids. The incredible harm to people, to civilians, in that conflict. I think we need the world to understand that it is absolutely unprecedented, that so many people have lost their lives, without mentioning all of those that have been harmed. By the way, the center, the American center that is responsible for looking at civilian arms in armed conflict, we relied quite a lot on their data, and their expert concluded that this was absolutely unheard of. So many harm to civilians. That center has just been closed down by the new owner of the White House.
We'll talk about it. But staying with this, so...
I know you were asking about the impact, how people are asking. Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because now we are in the ceasefire mode. So no one talks about genocide, and it's very difficult to even bring justice on the table. But it is our role as a human rights organization to make sure that it is not falling off the agenda, including on the part of Palestinian negotiators. So, yes, on Friday, I don't know if you know, but a number of countries.
9.
Yes, 9 countries, and we were there too. Alest is part of this initiative. So the Hague group has come together, and it is about justice for the genocide. So we are really grateful to those countries for insisting that there cannot be peace without justice. I mean, it becomes so everyone use those terms, but surely that's what it is. There cannot be a long-term peace without justice being delivered. So International Criminal Court, so far there is no indictment for genocide. We are asking the prosecutor to do it and add that particular charge. The ICJ is going to take forever and ever to come up with its decision. The ICJ is a conservative body. It has not done a great deal of jurisprudence on genocide and has always been very prudent. But we do hope that with a level of evidence and now legal writing on intent in the context of an armed conflict, that the ICJ will go in the right direction. The reason I'm mentioning that is because so far the ICJ has adopted a threshold for intent, which could lead them to suggest that there can only be one intent. And of course, in an armed conflict situation, this is a ridiculous position.
Right.
It's just mind-boggling that this body of judges could even consider that in the context of an armed conflict, there can be one motivation, one intention. So there are many lawyers right now, many jurists, many experts who are producing a great deal of legal writing so that when the ICJ comes to make its ruling, it will be relying, hopefully, on an extensive body of thinking around intent in the context of an armed conflict, genocidal intent in the context of an armed conflict, because, of course, there are other intentions. Going after Hamas is absolutely a legitimate military intention. And what we have been insisting throughout the launch of the report is that having a military objective to go after Hamas does not negate the existence of another objective.
So let's stay with that possibility. And, we've heard a lot about that, given the threshold that the ICJ has adopted and the fact that it is quite conceivable that the ICJ will not determine that this was genocide, right? I mean, that's what we're saying over here. So there are some who argue that in the long run, the focus on apartheid as a tool, sort of a strategically sort of arguing from the perspective of apartheid, which is systematic, which is ongoing, ethnic cleansing. What we've been seeing in the West Bank and continue to see now, as opposed to the genocide of Gaza in the long run. What do you think about that? Sort of what lines can you draw between the two?
Look, I don't draw the line. And to begin with, they are, apartheid and military occupations are. Military occupation is the easiest in many ways because that has already been acknowledged by the ICJ. There is international recognition of the fact that Israel is unlawfully occupying those territories. So, tactically speaking, there is a lot more options right now just around military occupation. On the crime of apartheid, which has not been acknowledged yet and recognized, not even by the International Criminal Court, for Amnesty International, it is part of the root causes and the context that cannot be evacuated, including in the context of the ceasefire. It is the reason why the ceasefire will not deliver what's needed. It is what should be occupying the negotiators right now. How are we going to offer long-term solution to the people of Palestine and to the people of Israel? And that can only be done by getting rid of this apartheid regime, getting rid of the military occupation, and by acknowledging the self-determination right of both population. So that's the fundamental, that's the fundamentals. Anything else is additional.
And the right of return, as per your report.
Well, but the right of return is already, again, it is something that we should not have to fight for. It's like the military occupation. It's already there, but, okay, that's going to be another fight. However, 47,000 people killed, and the incredible level of suffering that has been created on the people of Gaza, the fact that there is a denial of the genocide by the most powerful countries in the world right now, and by Israel itself, the fact that to claim genocide can take you to jail, can make you, being denied entry into country. There was someone in Switzerland last week. Yeah.
Yes.
So for all those reasons, we've got to keep speaking about the genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. For justice to be rendered, the first important step is not to silence it. So for me, it is absolutely essential. Even if it's not connected to Israel, I can tell you, I always find a way of speaking about the genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza. It is for the own preservation of what's left of our global system that we need to be speaking about it and not burying it under the weight of, so-called peace deal or anything else. We must be continuing to speak about it, even if it makes many people uncomfortable, and demanding justice. And it is going to be for European and for Americans the front line of preserving civil and political rights, because those expressing solidarity with Palestinians have been targeted throughout the year, but it is increasing. It is not decreasing with the ceasefire. It is not decreasing. It is still there. It is now moving into the legal field. It is moving into the policy field. So it's going to be really the front line of everyone's fight. Everyone who believes in human rights will have to fight for the right of people to express solidarity with Palestinians and to speak of the genocide.
And to continue doing that. So let's talk about, you mentioned the new owner or occupant of the White House. And soon after he returned to office, during Davos this past month, you called his policies an attack on political rights. You also warned of obedience to the great new chief over there. You also said we're going to see a multiplication of that throughout the world, an environment that is already full of authoritarian practices and authoritarian individuals. Unpack and add to that.
That was in Davos. I was in Davos before, and it was fascinating. And that really scared me. So you know what Davos is, 3,000 mostly Western, mostly white. I mean, there are quite a few Gulf representatives. and the private sector. And I tell you, the submission to Donald Trump was mind-boggling. If they could have rolled on the floor and, hey, like this, they would have done it. I mean, it was sickening to observe. Now, I'm not saying that every individual in the room was doing it, but there is absolutely no doubt that the overall atmosphere and messages that you were getting out of Davos was one of complete submission and of complete dedication to the Trump vision, dedication to economic growth without any kind of critical understanding of what growth is in a situation of climate upheaval. No questions around the attacks on migrants, transgender, and so on. Actually, you saw that the day he was inaugurated with those most powerful people nodding to the man attacking the most vulnerable of us all, So what you saw at the inauguration, I saw with 3,000 people in Davos. Submission, ritualized theatrics, and, dollar money just coming in front of their eyes. So that was really, really very scary.
And that was scary without Trump there.
Yeah, he came online, but it was very scary without him there, because he already has his devoted, loyal soldiers working on his behalf, and because they smell money, they smell that there is money to be made. The government representative were a little bit more worried, skeptical, but I think you're going to see also the same kind of behavior. So there will be tit for tat. We've seen that yesterday, which is, worrying quite a few people, but it's bound to happen. Tit for tat, obedience. Some of those who have nothing or believe in it will just match Donald Trump. They're going to be copycat, it's going to be the Hungary of the world, and all of those would be authoritarian leaders in Europe, of whom there are increasingly a large number. It's going to embolden them to do what Donald Trump is doing. So my hope is that there will be resistance. And it's going to be, and that if it is to be effective, it has to be collective.
What form of resistance? How?
Well, countries coming together and saying no, we're not gonna, fall for this organized chaos that is only gonna benefit one country or one group of people. I think that a single country resisting Donald Trump is not gonna succeed. That's for sure. But countries coming together, whether it's at the EU level, but, I think it needs to be much more chance.
Global. Let's talk about the Group of Nine, right?
Yeah. For instance,
let's remember who those countries are. So South Africa, which ambassador is here in the front row. Namibia,
Belize,
Bolivia,
Cuba. Who else?
It's not, but there's another South America.
Yeah, there are few more South America.
So all global South.
They are all global South. All global
Malaysia.
South. Yeah, Malaysia. Not so Malaysia, yeah.
So they're not geographically sort of one unit, right? Unlike the European Union or if you want to talk about sort of sub-Saharan Africa or what have you. So do you see that as a possibility?
Absolutely. I think what is fascinating with the Hague group is that it is understanding that in 2025 we need to see beyond regional group, and we need to see beyond organized institution. In order to make sense of the crazy world we inhabit, we need to create different kind of networks and relationships. And that's what the Hague Group is about. And, when I travel in Europe and, let's say Spain, who has been really strong on the genocide, and I said, well, you should be organized with others. He said, well, with others, I can't do anything because I just need one person in the EU opposing our action, and that's it. The EU is... So the only way a EU country right now can be meaningfully working on behalf of justice in Palestine is by building networks outside the EU.
That are not regional, but that are connected.
Yeah, and that's this level of flexibility and thinking outside organized institution. I think is going to be really really key. It's not going to be sufficient, but it's going to be really important.
What do you expect under Trump? I mean, already what we're experiencing in terms of pro-Palestine activism. I mean, he just didn't he just sign an executive order, pledging to cancel visas for students who participate in pro-Palestinian protests and so on. We saw it happen in his first term, moving the embassy to Jerusalem and everything else. Already he has talked to the leadership in Jordan and Egypt about just, 1.5 billion. I mean, they just move them. What do you fear the most?
So, I have to tell you right now, I don't feel very good about the prospect. And I think it's not new. It's not just Donald Trump, but Donald Trump is precipitating a change of era. There is no doubt. We are changing era right now. It's not his product. It's not just him, but he's precipitating it in the same way that Gaza is symbolizing the change of era, the complete annihilation of international law and international values, the fact that governments, powerful states, not only violate international law, they've always done that. But what they are doing now is saying, we don't care, international law does not matter that much or does not apply to us. That's we're entering into a completely new way of thinking right now, which is this chaotic rejection of everything that had glued us together since 1948.
No respect for international law.
Not this, nothing. It's chaos. It's organized chaos in order to come up with something that will benefit the military might and the powerful. So it's a change. It's a change of era. What we need to be concerned with is that it does not mean that we are in a 1948 scenario. What it means is that we are in a 1935 scenario. And that's what scares me. And that should scare everybody else. Because I do not know whether we have the maturity as an international community to move from the equivalent of 1937 to 1948 without what happened in between. And indeed, some people are arguing that, in fact, we're already in the midst of what happened in between. And it's just going to escalate further. So, I'm making that, maybe it's a reference that is not as meaningful in Qatar, but in Europe, where people are arguing, now we're 1948, we need to... I said, no, we're not in a 1948 scenario. Don't fool yourself. We are in the midst of a 1930s scenario. That's where we are. So I think that's really important. Incredible instability and insecurity. We are not in an end project. This is, I don't think, not even Trump has a vision of where he wants to go. There is not, they are destroying, but there is no plan B. The International Criminal Court, we don't want it. The ICJ, we don't want it. The Security Council, probably not that much. The UN, we don't want it. What else? I mean, that it's destruction without any plan B. So lots of insecurity and instability, but I think the good thing is that it gives everyone a possibility of imagining what it should be like. It's important for NGOs. I say civil society are definitely not the biggest and greatest actors in that context. And we are attacked relentlessly right now. But putting that aside, we have a role to play, as do the academia, in imagining what world should come next, what global system should come next. Yes, of course, Donald Trump and Russia and China, they are the ones trying to model it. But let's not forget what South Africa has done. Let's not forget what, over the last year and a half, we've seen countries that were not even present in 1948 saying, well, let's not throw the baby with the bathwater, please, and let's try to keep something so that we can move in a more organized and less destructive fashion into the next era. So it is really for everyone at this moment in time to think of the world and the system we need to build to, it's not just around peace and security, it's around the financial architecture that should run trade and so on. Yes, Donald Trump is trying to do something, but hey, we're not completely important. There is, in September, the Secretary General and others had, with the Namibian, with the co-chair, were doing the Summit for the Future. There were some, not radical, but fairly good idea on what the new version of the global financial architecture should look like. That is an alternative, not necessarily only what Donald Trump would want to do. So the question is, how do we oppose what he's trying to do so that we have a more a vision of a global redistribution of wealth, which is definitely not what he has in mind, that is being driven. There are ideas, and where there are no ideas, it's for us to come up with now.
Right. And so basically what you're saying is we need to be thinking beyond Trump. We need to be thinking about the new world order.
Absolutely.
That transcends this era. But, there are certain things that have nothing to do with Trump, right? I mean, so for example, the financial architecture, and our former colleague, Mark Mazauer, wrote about governing the world.
And
sorry?
Stiglitz. Stiglitz.
And Stiglitz as well, right? Yeah. So the financial architecture that has been in operation since the mid-1940s has already come under question. Are you suggesting that perhaps what the Trump era, the global Trump era, right, may be doing is accelerating sort of changes that might need to happen?
Well, I'm not saying it. It is precipitating changes that were already ongoing that could have come in a much more organized way. But, the international community, I think, is what it is. And it's nothing is that incremental. So he is precipitating the changes. But the question that we need to ask is whether or not we're going to win. Because he's not just precipitating more changes. He is, his vision around tariff, his obsession with America first, is the fact that the U.S. economy is, really in good shape right now. There is no competition. Yes, it has some weaknesses around the balance of payment and inflation, but it is a powerful economy. So let's not minimize the impact of Donald Trump either, because he could reshape part of the system. And if he does reshape it, I don't think we will have a lot to benefit from. That's the fear. It's not only because of who he is, but the vision he's putting forward and put forward during his campaign is not a vision where most people in this world will feel that they have something they can extract from. And, this obsession with America first as a driver, attracting more investment. They already have all of the investment, attracting more manufacturers. Their productivity is already skyrocketing where it is plunging elsewhere. For all those reasons, we need to be worried. The rest of the world need to be worried because they are economically and militarily extremely powerful. It cannot just be, But putting that aside, we also have ideas, we have numbers, we have, countries that are prepared to fight back. So and they have their own weaknesses in their economy. So not that. Anyway, all I'm saying is we are in a change of era. There is no doubt. It started before Donald Trump. I will say it has been incremental, but for the last 5 years, we've gone there progressively. And Gaza, to me, was bang. It's really 1948. We can kiss them goodbye. It's unstable. It's insecure. It's extremely dangerous. What are we going to do about it? We, civil society, we're going to do what we do, which is to document, to denounce, to speak about alternatives, and we're going to try to do also more creative exercise. If the international human rights architecture is not sufficient, and it is not, what else do we need to invent? It's not because it was done in 1948 and afterwards that everything worked. In fact, many things did not work and have not worked. So we also cannot sacralize what was done. We need to be smart, tactical, strategic. What do we need to keep? What do we need to completely change? What do we need to reform?
And we need to keep the eye on the long term.
For the kids. For us, but all the children and the grandchildren. This is, look at the shit we're giving them. Really. Seriously, it's awful.
We're sorry.
Yeah, it's awful.
We are. I'm going to have a couple of questions for you. And then actually the second question has to do with the kids and with the older kids who are the students. And then I'm going to turn it over to the audience for questions, because I'm sure that there are things that they want to engage with you on. And I'm going to sort of take it a little bit more to Agnès and, sort of a bit more personal level. It's a tough question, but when you and I, and especially you, witness what's been going on in America on the freedom of expression front since October 7th, and as we look specifically at Colombia, where you spent almost a decade, I spent 3 decades, and you set up the Global Freedom of Expression Initiative. During that time, I think it was when the Knight Institute was established, right? First Amendment Institute. So a lot of investment in, freedom of expression on a global scale, academically and within the academy and outside of the academy. And then when you witness what's happened over the past couple of years and the clamping down on protests, police being brought to campus, arrests taking place. Most recently, Catherine Franke, a legal scholar, is basically terminated, a tenured professor. What does that? What do you think of all of this? Can you sort of make sense of it all? Is sort of the work that's done by by you and by others sort of was working against something that is more structural, or was it a matter of people or a reflection of what was happening more broadly?
Well, first, I think we need to acknowledge that for about a decade now, we have seen a progressive infringement on freedom of expression and in particular on political expression of dissent. So it has happened in the United States, but it has happened globally. So the space, the independent media in particular has been targeted. It was targeted during the first version of Donald Trump. Local media has more or less disappeared from anyone globally. The capture of the media by either the state of very rich and powerful actors has become, I will say, a global phenomena. So the genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza has occurred in a context where freedom of expression and the expression of dissent in particular had become much more difficult. So I think we need to acknowledge that. What happened since October 7 and the Hamas atrocity crimes committed then, followed by the genocide, is first and foremost a phenomenon that is Western. I don't think it is a global phenomenon. The targeting of the expression of solidarity, pro-Palestinian solidarity, the criminalization of it, is mostly European, Canadian, and Western Europe. And even in Western Europe, it is not the same everywhere. As far as Columbia University is concerned, and other universities, I mean, I think the book of what happened needs to be written, because I still cannot understand how they ended up where they are now, with several university presidents resigning, the Congress going after, and now even more against private universities. I just cannot understand how it has been so badly managed. It's mind-boggling. Yeah, it's absolutely mind-boggling. But I think the reason why it's mind-boggling will tend to show that it has much deeper roots than just some people's incompetence. It has much deeper roots, and we may not have been aware of some.
People are quick to blame it on Milou Shafiq as president.
No, I think it's far too easy. There is much deeper roots, which I did not really have conscience, really realized some aspect of American society until this last year.
So the last question, you mentioned, I'm very glad you mentioned the younger generations, because I'd like to reflect quickly with you on stage your own trajectory, Agnès. And in the month of February, Black History Month started yesterday, right? You went to an HBCU, a historic Black college or university. You went to Howard University. You're very close to Georgetown in DC.
Yeah. Close and not close. There was a bus going from Howard to Georgetown, because I took a course in Georgetown on Middle East politics, in fact. And when I took the bus at Howard, only Black people and me. By the time we got to Georgetown, so this bus crossed the entire city in that way. By 16th Street, people started shifting. By the time you got to Georgetown,
it was all white.
All white.
Sad but funny, right? And you've made, you've really done incredible things, and you still have a long way to go, and you will do other incredible things. What would you tell young people about, particularly as it relates to civic society work, human rights work? What advice would you give them? Why should they go into those fields? Not be discouraged, not be, not give up. You hear it a lot. Okay, fantastic. They did this report or they said this, but look at what's happening. What difference? What would you say to inspire them beyond doing what you already did and what I always do, which is apologize to the younger generations for everything that we are leaving behind?
So I will not necessarily take myself as an example or you, or because we really lived in a different era. And my first advice to young people right now is that if they want to engage, and I invite them to be global citizens, to carry a vision other than for their own, that they don't do that on their own, that they must be doing that as part of a collective undertaking, that they, it's a tough world. It's far tougher than my world, far tougher. And, I was at the beginning of the women's rights, but it's far tougher. It's much more dangerous. So if they really want, if they are committed to making this world a better world, whether it's on climate, on human rights, on migrants issue, they must do that as part of a collective. It can be a civil society organization. It can be part of a university initiative. They need to be super smart. I always insist we don't need dead hero, and we certainly don't need more martyr. We have enough of them. I've seen too many martyrs in my life. I am telling them, don't become one. Be smart. Be well. Understand that the other side will not hesitate to use violence or to use arbitrary detention or to use harassment online. I mean, they all know that. So each of your commitment undertaking must be well thought out. I will not recommend too much spontaneous action in our days and age, because I think the risks are extremely high, and I see a risk in a lot of places, even the one where you don't think about. So it doesn't mean you stop taking risk. What it means is that you plan your risk in advance. You have your mitigation plan. You have your lawyers. You are trained in civil disobedience. I mean, all of those things. You must be prepared because it's a tough world outside, and but you cannot not do it. You just the entire world needs need people who have some privilege, who are a bit protected either because of their social class, their families, their education. All of us have some duties for the rest of the world because of the privilege that we have, and we must be using them for things other than our material well-being. So yes, I encourage them, and yes, I'm going to say this is the most beautiful profession or undertaking. You're going to meet the most inspiring people, the bravest individuals. You're going to be blown away by what they have done, what they are prepared to do, how they think. So yes, do become one of them. Become part of that collective and that community. But be smart. Be smart. That's what I'd say.
That's great. Thank you. You can't give up the fight. You cannot be fearless, right? You're fearless. I mean, how many death threats had come your way?
Quite a few. But, I have to say, I feel quite protected. I'm working for large organization. I'm French, I'm white, I'm old. All of this are, so I think I can keep pushing the boundaries. I think I have a bit more. Yeah.
That's great. Let's take a few questions, and I'm going to ask you to please just be as brief as possible, because I'm sure there will be a number of questions, and let's make sure that there's a question mark at the end. So if you want to start over there, yeah, we move this way. How about that?
Firstly, I'd like to thank you guys so much for organizing this talk. It's always so nice to attend these events. What I wanted to ask is, you guys talked about the importance of media and public discourse in bringing voice to the genocide that occurred in Gaza. And what I feel as someone who likes to peruse news outlets is, I feel as whenever Gaza is mentioned, it's always in conjunction with another global powerhouse. Particularly lately, it's been the U.S. And even the semantics they use, for example, they'll say Israelis were murdered versus Palestinians were just killed. And what I wonder is, when these media outlets are filtering the genocide through this Western lens, does it make it harder for us to rely on media to spread light to what's the genocide? And if we don't have media, what is another way?
Would you rather take one question at a time, or should we take two or three?
Yeah, 2 or 3, but
2 or 3.
I don't have it there, so... Oh, careful.
Yes, the gentleman there in the front row. Moving this way. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for all of your comments. You mentioned that the apartheid definition for Israel came about in 2022. Apartheid had been going on for decades and decades before that, so what took so long? And I guess the other question which is related to that is genocide in December 24 was 14 months after it began. If one definition of genocide is simply intent, didn't you have all the evidence you needed by the end of October 23? Thank you.
Oh.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle there. Really, the woman in the front. Yeah, please. Yeah, here. Thanks.
Thank you. As you mentioned, the right of return for Palestinians is acknowledged at the international scale, as well as the fact that Israel is considered to be a military occupation state, as well as the fact that there's an ICC arrest warrant against Netanyahu. However, there's been an absence of enforcement for any of these statements. So I just wanted to ask, what with acknowledgement of genocide at the highest international court caused a shift in ensuring the protection of Palestinians that the other previous statements and arrest warrants have been unable to achieve?
Thank you. I think this is... I think, can you repeat the last part?
Okay, yeah. What would the protection... what would the acknowledgement of genocide at the highest international court cause a shift in ensuring the protection of Palestinians that the other previous statements have been unable to achieve?
That other...
That the other previous statements, such as the acknowledgement of Israel being a military state, so how would acknowledging that Israel is a genocidal state cause a shift in ensuring the protections of Palestinians?
How would that result in a shift to provide protection for Palestinians?
To provide, protection of the international time.
Okay, you want to address those maybe now and then take another round?
Difficult. They are all a very difficult question. So absolutely, the Western media in general have been pretty pathetic very biased on the question of the mainstream media. Let me be very clear on the question of Israel genocide. It doesn't mean we don't engage with them. Of course, we engage, and we also every time they publish something that we believe is inaccurate, we meaning some of the national section will demand a right of reply. What is also true, though, is that and what we need to understand is that the majority of the world is and we, no one has done a survey of the world population, but I will say, based on our work, based on what we've seen at the UN General Assembly, based on the number of protests that we have monitored the world over and that have really gone for more than 12 months now, I think there is no doubt that there is a substantive minority of people in the Western world, if not a majority of people in the Western world, who believe that Israel is committing the crime of genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. I can also say that there are countries already, such as Spain, Belgium, Norway, Moldova, and Ireland, to name a few, where there is where the population, the general consciousness is that there is a genocide being committed, and the media in those countries are certainly not shying away from that language. Now, I presume you mostly are reading the English language or hearing or the Arabic one. And yes, on the English side, it has not been so good. But for us, it doesn't mean not to engage. We keep engaging, and we also engage with the very, what gives me hope as far as the information ecosystem is concerned is the multiplication of small online media that are extremely professional. They are investigative journalists, and they have been countering the narrative, whether it's in Germany, in the UK, or in France, in a very powerful way. And they attract the young people. Their readers, their listeners are young people. So I would like to encourage you all not to just build your sense of how the world is looking at Gaza on the basis of what the New York Times or the Financial Times are publishing. This is not a good data gathering. It gives you a sense of how the elite may think. It doesn't tell you how the people think. And you need to really dig deeper, including in those countries, to be connected with what the population, including in the West, think about the situation in Gaza. Regarding the genocide, yes, I think October would have been premature. I know some people concluded genocide, but they concluded genocide in October on the basis of history and on the basis of the speech, the statement that had been made. We, at least at Amnesty, could not have done that. Could we have reached the conclusion much earlier? Yes, there is no doubt. I think we certainly could have done that, but this is not the way we work. I've explained to you that in addition to collecting data and building a case, a very solid case, which I think we have, and so far it is the most solid case that has been developed on the genocide. This is only one side of the story. We also need to engage with every one of the national entities of Amnesty, and we need to bring them to a position where they feel that they can go and defend that position. And that takes as much time as it does to collect the data. This being said, I completely agree. I don't think, and there are many people who have concluded, who put forward fairly good analysis of what was happening already in December, so a year before we did. And the third question is how the acknowledgement of genocide will protect the Palestinian. This is a very interesting question. I think, what does that mean? When a genocide is understood to have taken place, historically, there are many things happening. One, special tribunals are being set up. Money is being, special projects are being established. The UN, if it still exists, becomes an avenue through which there is a complete, recognition of that genocide. So symbolically, financially, politically, it makes a big difference. That being said, it's not going to happen immediately. We know that, and I can't see the US on its own acknowledging that a genocide has taken place, and why, or Germany, for political reason, not for legal reason, not for empirical reason, which is what is so, so unbelievably awful. It is that it is a politically determined position where it should be a legally determined, empirically determined position. They are passing a judgment without the fact or without wanting to know the fact. I don't see them shifting in their position immediately, but I think it will be really important for the International Criminal Court to include a charge of genocide. What it means is that the ICC that is already being targeted by the US will be even more targeted by the US. But so be it, So
They're being targeted anyway.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I mean, it doesn't really protect. Justice is a long-term investment, so it won't protect in the short term, or not even maybe in the medium term. But justice is about ensuring that it does not get repeated. It's about ensuring that there is investment into addressing the root causes, and so on and so forth. So it's a long-term investment, justice. It's not for short-term protection.
Okay, let's take another round and try to give that time.
Let me just say something. If the Genocide Convention had been implemented, then yes, it could have been protection, because the ICJ had made a very clear demand that steps be taken, because they determined in January that the risk of genocide were very high, and they asked governments to act accordingly, and the governments did not. So justice is not just a long-term investment. If steps had been taken, then it could have protected Palestinians already in January, and it did not, because the ICJ ruling or position was not accepted.
So getting it from the young woman there, and then the young man is up there, and then we take one from there and one from here. I'm trying to be
Yeah. Hello. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Zain, and I'm a senior. I just wanted to ask, how do you think that if there will ever be peace for Palestinians? Like, for example, so like this is not a criticism, but a genuine question. As before, you said that long-term safety can only happen if apartheid is removed, and then we can have self-determination of both groups. But can there ever be true and long-term safety and peace for Palestinians if we give, like, let's just say the Israeli settlers more right to rule? As you know, the system is not built fairly, and if they're already determining themselves and have 4 years, how can the Palestinians ever be able to self-determine fairly in comparison with the Israelis? And thank you so much.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the direct consequences. Summer County.
Okay. When you get another microphone,
Nice.
to all. Okay, not that too, of course. And okay, you bet.
No. I'm half blind, I can't see the thing. There are 3 people here, I can see it.
You go ahead. Yeah. So,
No, thank you so much for this talk today. Firstly, I have 2 very short questions. Technically speaking, how is the military objective of going after Hamas a valid excuse to use against the claims of genocide when occupied people have the right of armed resistance and the attack happened on the 67 borders, which are technically Palestine? So armed resistance is a right for us to do. So how is that used as an excuse to excuse genocide, I guess? The second question, are you aware that the right of return does not cover millions of Palestinians who are holders of travel documents of Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and the Jordan's 2-year passport? None of us can actually access Palestine, even if we are from, let's say, Gaza Strip or the A and B areas of the West Bank. I say that as a Palestinian who is from the Gaza Strip, an Egyptian document holder. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it working there?
yeah. I had a question about how the definition of Israel as committing apartheid to the Palestinians. What are the direct consequences that holds to the Israeli government? Are there any extra sanctions that could be added or any international consequences?
Great. Thank you. Okay. Any more over there as well?
Hello. My question is, how can a genocide still be justified in this day and age, and how is it still deemed reasonable globally?
All right.
We'll take one more. I cannot go to all of you. Okay. Just very quickly. Yes. I'm working for.
Is that too? I'll be really brief. I really appreciate the inspiring end to the talk that you've given and the plan that we should sort of have as a young, I'll still consider myself on the border of young, but as an organization, as Amnesty International, what's your plan for the next sort of dark period that we're going in? This is an absolutely brave step that you've taken with this report, and I'm sure you've had. Well, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your plan of mitigating all the risks that are coming now.
Thank you. Just pass the microphone to the woman in front of you. Yeah, and that will be the last question. Plan for Palestinian descent or no for Palestinian?
Thank you.
Hi, it was a pleasure to hear you both talk tonight. My question for you is, how does Amnesty verify and collect evidence in conflict zones like Gaza, and how does it collect, how does it verify the evidence that Israel specifically says is not true?
Great questions.
Okay.
Okay, so difficult question, and sometimes I may need you on the self-determination issues. Well, I mean, clearly, with what's happening in the West Bank right now, it's the mute. It just not every action being taken in the West Bank at the moment undermine any kind of prospect for long-term peace and self-determination. I guess that was your question. I'm not sure, but yes, there is an absolute contradiction between what's happening with those expansion of the settlement and the violence against Palestinians' home and properties in the West Bank, in the occupied territory, and their right to self-determination. It's an absolute contradiction, which I don't know how the negotiators right now and the dreamers of the two-state solution, how they're going to even deal with that. But I don't know whether that was your question, but that's how I understood it. Yes, and I will agree with you that as long as this is not being addressed, as long as there is no return to the 1947 borders, I don't understand what kind of self-determination or two-state solution can be imagined. So on the right to return and the 67 border, sorry, I'm not sure I fully understood the question on the...
How does it apply to people who are who have travel documents? That was your question? You... Still there.
Hamas.
The response is
Hamas and... Right. Okay, the right. Yeah, no, I mean, look, as I've said to the student this morning, earlier today, we are a human rights organization, okay? So we approach those issues from the standpoint of international human rights law. It does not have to be the only way that it can be done. And I can fully understand that some people would rather join solidarity organization, anti-colonial organization, and so on and so forth. And when you get into that kind of organization, you are not, you do not have to see things in the same way that I do, okay? What does it mean is that, yes, you certainly can resist, but even if you resist, you need to follow rules. That will be my position as a human rights organization. You need to follow rules, and those rules means you don't target civilians. That's, at a very basic level, even if those civilians are in a territory where they should not be. Now, I've had that conversation many times over the last 14 months, and I understand that for some people, that is not what resistance is all about. But for me personally, and for Amnesty International, the notion of resistance is certainly something that we support. We will do all we can to protect the right of people to resist their oppressor and their oppression, but we will also insist that this resistance must follow certain rules. That's how we will, handle that question. And on the right to return, I'm sorry, I don't think I have the information. I don't know whether you do.
Sorry, it's so only. I mean, the right of return applies to, I mean, the way that it has been argued, to my understanding, is in the context of refugees, people who are registered as refugees, right? So in Jordan, you have very large numbers who are registered as refugees. And in Syria and in Lebanon, you don't even have anything beyond a laissez-passer. You don't even have proper rights in the country. So the right of return, as far as I understand it, applies to people who fall into those categories, who are registered as refugees with UNRWA, for example. Okay, and then there was
something about sanctions in relation to apartheid. Yes, this is certainly what we are advocating at Amnesty International. Of course, the first thing we advocate for is that the system of apartheid must be eliminated, but that governments have a responsibility not to engage with countries that are practicing the crime against humanity of apartheid, and that does include a range of sanctions. Amnesty International has some limitation on the sanction that we advocate for, because we believe that they should be all multilateral, that there should not be any unilateral sanction. But further than that, we absolutely advocate for sanctions against Israel in relation to apartheid and to genocide and to the military occupation. So, how can genocide be justified in these days and age? I mean, we've heard that for the last 15, 16 months. You create an enemy that most people or a lot of people hate and dislike, and that becomes the way you justify the collective punishment of an entire population. You argue that this enemy is everywhere, that this enemy is, that there is no innocent civilians, not even a child. The enemy is Gaza. The enemy is everywhere, and that's how at least both the Israeli authorities and the American authorities have been justifying, if that's the term, genocide by insisting that what Israel is doing is falling within the remit of international humanitarian law. They also get into the concept of self-defense that I will not get into, but that's how they do it, and that's why it was so important for Amnesty to demonstrate that in all of the crimes that we documented, there was no military. There was no military target or no evident military value to what was being done, which will tend to show that there must have been other intention behind those crimes, and given their repetition and the systematic nature of it, that reinforced what we had found in terms of the intent to eradicate a part or parcel of a population. Which is how do we verify evidence? So we had consultant in Gaza for the duration of the conflict. Very, very brave people who, for the first 6 or 7 months, have gone to some. I think we've investigated around 78 sites of bombings. And what it means is that they will go to the site, they will take photos, they will take videos, they will interview people, they will try to see whether there were military value or target around it. And for some there were. So whenever we found a military target, meaning Hamas being present, then the next question is whether or not the Israelis had taken precautions as per international humanitarian law, which becomes a much more difficult investigation. We needed to know whether people had been warned, how they had been warned, and so on and so forth. At the end, there was so much evidence of direct targeting of civilians without any military target around. We actually ended up focusing heavily on those cases because they, on their own, demonstrated the intent of the authorities to target civilians. And again, I want to reiterate the fact that we reached that conclusion not on the basis of one or two cases, because then you could say, they made mistakes. Okay. But what we could show is that over 6 months period, it was repeated incident of civilians being directly targeted, only civilians being targeted, entire families being decimated, and as I have mentioned, use of weapons with bombs with very large radius that are bound to destroy. So all of those evidence gathering was done on site by our colleagues. In addition, my colleagues in the West Bank and elsewhere were collecting other information, including by calling, including by having other interviews, also reaching out to IDF. Every investigation we do is documented and sent to the IDF for their reaction, for their comments, which they never did. But every one of them, we have written to them with our findings before the genocide report for every one of those investigations. So that's how we have done the work. So on site and a lot of and also interviewing people online, iPhone, humanitarian workers, UN people, journalists, Palestinian journalists, and so on. Plus all of the legal exercise, because once we gather the evidence, the next step is the easiest step was when there was absolutely no military objectives inside. That was for us the easiest cases. But when there were military target, then we still had the capacity, or for some of them, even the responsibility to determine whether or not the killings of civilians had been indiscriminate or disproportionate, which is more difficult to assess, but needed to be done too.
Thank you. We put in so much work, and I can't tell you how grateful we all are to have you with us, Agnès. And thank you for all the work that you do, Guido.